Hey there, it's me Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description. At midnight, the park was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long, flickering shadows. The bench mentioned in the note sat under a gnarled oak tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. I approached cautiously, my breath visible in the crisp night air. She was already there, waiting for me. Alexis. But something was different this time. Her posture was tense, her expression unreadable. "You're late," she said, her voice colder than before. "I didn't know if I should come," I admitted, sitting beside her. "You don't have a choice," she replied, her tone clipped. "Why are we here?" I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. She turned to me, her eyes burning with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Because the timeline isn't stable." "Not yet." "Not completely." "But I've been doing everything I'm supposed to," I protested. "I'm living authentically." "I'm living," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "But not fully. You're still holding back, still clinging to the safety of half-truths." Her words stung because I knew they were true. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I want you to stop lying to yourself," she said simply. The next day, I couldn't shake our conversation. Her words gnawed at me, pulling at threads I'd worked so hard to weave together. Was I still lying to myself? Was there more I hadn't faced? I decided to find out. I returned to the facility, demanding access to the records of my integration. I needed to understand what had happened, what parts of me, of Alex and Alexis, had been merged, and what might still be missing. Dr. Larson was hesitant at first, warning me that delving too deeply could risk destabilizing the timeline further. But I insisted. The data was overwhelming. Streams of information detailing every aspect of my identity, my memories, my very being. As I read through the files, I began to notice gaps, moments in time that didn't align with my memories, events that felt both familiar and alien. And then I found it. A fragment of a timeline where I hadn't chosen integration. Where I had remained Alex, erasing Alexis completely. The file was incomplete, corrupted, but what little I could decipher painted a grim picture: isolation, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Had I made the right choice? That night, I dreamed of Alexis again. We were standing on opposite sides of a bridge, the gap between us wide and seemingly insurmountable. She looked at me, her expression soft yet tinged with sadness. "You think this is about a choice," she said. "But it's not. It's about acceptance." "Acceptance of what?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty space between us. "Of everything," she said. "Of who we were, who we are, and who we could be. Until you accept that, the timeline will never be truly stable." I wanted to argue, to tell her I had accepted everything, but the words wouldn't come. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I visited my family. My parents were surprised but welcoming, their initial hesitation giving way to cautious warmth. We talked for hours about my life, my struggles, and the journey that had brought me here. For the first time, I didn't hold back. I told them about Alex, about Alexis, about the integration and the choices I had made. It was messy and emotional, but by the end of the day, I felt lighter. The timeline, it seemed, did too. The night after visiting my family, I sat alone in my apartment, the echoes of our conversations replaying in my mind. Their cautious acceptance had been more than I could have hoped for, but it wasn't enough to quiet the unease growing inside me. The ripples were still there. I could feel them, faint but persistent, like whispers at the edge of my consciousness. And then there was Alexis. She hadn't appeared since our meeting in the park, but her presence lingered in my thoughts, a constant reminder of the unfinished business between us. I decided to return to the facility, hoping to find answers in the data I hadn't yet explored. Dr. Larson was less accommodating this time. "You're pushing too far," he said, his tone sharper than usual. The integration process was already risky. Digging into the details now could destabilize everything we've worked to stabilize. "But it's not stable," I countered. "Not completely. The ripples are still there." He hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. "What exactly are you looking for?" I didn't have an answer. Not a clear one, anyway. I need to understand," I said finally. After a long pause, he relented, granting me access to the deeper layers of the integration records. The files were a labyrinth of data, each fragment more complex than the last. As I sifted through them, patterns began to emerge, glimpses of moments that didn't align with my memories. One fragment stood out. A sequence labeled Priority Memory Node 17 contained a vivid scene, Alexis standing in front of a mirror, tears streaming down her face as she adjusted a necklace I didn't recognize. The memory felt both alien and familiar, like a photograph I had seen but couldn't place. As I replayed the sequence, I noticed something odd. The reflection in the mirror wasn't Alexis, it was me. Alex. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. These weren't just fragments of Alexis's life, they were fragments of mine. Lives we had lived in parallel, overlapping in ways I hadn't fully comprehended. I closed the file, my hands trembling. That night, I dreamed of Alexis again. This time, we were in a room I didn't recognize, a sterile, white space with no doors or windows. She stood across from me, her expression unreadable. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" she said. "See what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The fractures," she said, gesturing to the walls around us. Cracks began to appear, spreading like veins through the pristine surface. "They're still there, Alex. Because you're still afraid." "I'm not afraid," I said, though the words felt hollow. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "You are. You're afraid of what you'll find if you dig too deep. Afraid of who you'll become." The cracks grew wider, pieces of the wall crumbling away to reveal darkness beyond. "What happens if the fractures break through?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Everything collapses," she said simply. I woke up drenched in sweat, the dream still vivid in my mind. For the first time, I wondered if the ripples weren't just remnants of past instability but warnings of something worse. The next day, I returned to the facility, determined to continue my investigation despite Dr. Larson's objections. "Why are you doing this?" Harriet asked, catching me in the hallway. "Because I have to," I said. "I need to know what's causing the fractures." "And if you find something you can't fix?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Then I'll deal with it," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. The deeper I delved into the integration records, the more fragmented the data became. It was as if the process had left scars not just on the timeline but on my very existence. One fragment showed a conversation between Alexis and Dr. Larson, a moment I had no memory of. She was arguing with him about the risks of the procedure, her voice laced with frustration. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about all the versions of me. Of Alex. If we don't get this right, we're not just risking one life, we're risking them all." Her words sent a chill through me. What had she meant by all the versions? Later that night, as I reviewed the files in my apartment, I felt the air shift. The temperature dropped, and the room grew unnaturally quiet. And then, she appeared. Alexis stood in the corner, her presence more tangible than ever before. She looked at me, her expression a mix of urgency and sadness. "You're running out of time," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The fractures are spreading," she said. "You have to go deeper. You have to find the source." "And what happens if I don't?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Then we both disappear." Please subscribe my channel for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.